Hey guys, asterisk, tonight we take a deep breath in time, travel to a place where marble columns tower over crowds and steam billows like a mysterious fog from massive vaulted roofs. You're about to wander down a cobbled street in ancient Rome, the afternoon sun warming your shoulders, olive trees swaying above, and the aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with the sharp tang of olive oil. There will be laughter, gossip, and a lot of naked strangers, and you're going to pretend that's totally normal. With thousands of years between you and this world, you probably won't survive this era's questionable hygiene standards. But luckily, we're only visiting in our imagination. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your slow stroll toward the baths of Caracalla, those enormous public thermae that Emperor Caracalla opened in the early 3rd century, making them one of the largest bath complexes ever built. The streets hum with the daily life of Rome. Vendors shout about figs and wine. A potter spins his wheel in the shade, and somewhere a donkey brays as if it has strong opinions on your itinerary. Children dart around your ankles, chasing a stray dog with a piece of cheese. To your right, you catch a glimpse of a mosaic inlaid with sea creatures, and above you, laundry flutters like little sails from tenement balconies. Rome's population swells past 1 million at this point in history, and the baths are the social equivalent of everyone's living room. You tilt your head, listening to the faint sound of running water, like a man-made river, just ahead. Sandals clip against the paving stones as you near the entrance. This is no quaint neighborhood bathhouse. Caracalla's complex sprawls over 33 acres. And its red brick outer walls tower several stories high. As you get closer, you notice carved stone plaques listing times and maybe a satirical message. From a witty graffitist, someone has scratched a caricature of a fat senator dozing in the caldorium because even ancient Romans couldn't resist drawing on public property. A gaggle of slaves sways past you carrying baskets of linens and amphorae filled with oil. The smell of sweat, perfumed oil, and damp plaster grows stronger, mingling with the pleasant aroma of roasted chestnuts being sold outside. A soldier, leaning on his spear, gives you a nod, the metal of his helmet glinting. His day off has clearly started. As you pass under the archway. 2 youths who have been lounging nearby straighten, eyeing your purse the way a modern teenager might eye a misplaced smartphone. Pickpockets were such a problem in bathhouses that many patrons entrusted their belongings to a paid attendant known as a capsarius. You tighten your grip on your leather pouch, making a mental note to tip your imaginary capsarius well. A small sign warns in Latin, "Be careful of thieves," apparently. Ancient governments believed in signage too. Historians still argue whether there were more than 900 or just over 1,000 baths scattered across Rome at the empire's height, but they agree the daily throng of people created perfect conditions for petty crime and gossip. The baths of Caracalla are designed not simply for cleanliness, but for leisure and display. You see wealthy patrons arriving in litters carried by sweaty porters, their tunics embroidered with purple stripes that mark senatorial rank. Yet right behind them trudge laborers with calloused hands, and even slaves trailing their masters, because the entry fee to the public baths was intentionally low, only a quadrans, the smallest bronze coin making bathing a universal ritual. One mainstream historian dryly notes that Rome was a city of immigrants and bathers, and you nod, soaking in the egalitarian feel while privately enjoying the modern convenience of deodorant. You pause at a vendor selling little phallic amulets that you're told will ward off the evil eye. They're comically explicit, and you blink, trying not to laugh. And this is one of those quirky tidbits textbook writers leave out. Romans hung these amulets in their homes, on necklaces, even on chariots, to bring luck and fertility. A man with a tray of spongia, a kind of ancient reusable sponge on a stick used in latrines, shoves past, muttering about low pay. Suddenly, you hear a loud splash and a roar of laughter from inside. Someone must have cannonballed the pool, and you realize that some behaviors are timeless. You consider how weird it is to wear your best wool tunic into a humid bathhouse, and decide to appreciate the relative convenience of modern gym towels. The outer courtyard is lined with marble, statues of gods and heroes. Water flows from fountains shaped like dolphins and lions into basins that overflow onto the mosaic floor. You take a moment to admire a statue of Hercules, depicted as all muscle and nonchalant attitude, leaning on his club. An old man chewing. Dates tells you that this very sculpture might have been copied from a Greek original. The baths weren't just for washing. They doubled as art galleries and libraries. In fact, the baths of Caracalla house collections of scrolls rivaling those in the great library of Alexandria. You glance through a colonnade into a reading room where scholars recline on couches, unrolling papyrus and occasionally sneaking glances at a group of giggling bathers. Historians debate whether these libraries were used for serious study or just as quiet escapes from the steamy rooms, but you imagine yourself stepping inside later, the smell of parchment and ink a welcome respite as you cross the threshold. Into the first chamber, you feel a shift in temperature. Warm air envelops you like a damp cloak. The floor beneath your feet radiates heat thanks to the hypocaust system, a network of brick pillars raising the floor above a roaring furnace. Heated air circulates under the floor and up through hollow walls, making the rooms comfortable even in winter. You can almost hear the engineers bragging about their latest upgrades, much like modern homeowners boasting about underfloor heating. The main entrance hall, with its soaring ceiling and colored marble columns imported from across the empire, echoes with a low murmur. Words bounce off the walls in a dozen languages, from Latin to Greek to the sing-song of merchants from far-flung provinces. You try to match each dialect with a region and realize you need more sleep for that. A boy runs past you with a basket of figs, slipping on the damp floor and nearly crashing into a mosaic depicting Neptune riding dolphins. You smile. Someone should put up a wet floor sign. Above you, the coffered ceiling glitters with bits of glass and gold that catch the light like a midnight sky. You wonder how on earth artisans manage to finish such detail while clinging to scaffolding. Your modern acrophobia is grateful for the 21st century harness. In one corner, a group of musicians tunes a lyre and a flute, preparing to add a soundtrack to the evening. The way sound reverberates off the marble makes even casual conversation sound like a dramatic proclamation. You resist the urge to shout, "Ego sum Spartacus," just to hear the echo. On the far wall, a bas-relief depicts athletes exercising, and you recognize a discus thrower, a wrestler, and a man using a halters, an ancient form of dumbbell used for long jump. You recall reading that exercise preceded bathing, ensuring that the day's sweat was thoroughly scrubbed off. Some scholars argue whether the Romans truly believed in the health benefits of alternating cold and hot water, or whether they just enjoyed the feeling. But either way, they created a communal ritual around it. You inhale deeply and catch a whiff of garum, that fermented fish sauce Romans put on everything, drifting from the food stalls outside. It's pungent. You raise an eyebrow and decide to skip dinner for now. While you stand there, a young woman with henna-dyed hair draped in a simple white stola walks past, carrying a basket of clean towels. She looks at you, smiles, and whispers something about the frigidarium being unbearably cold today. You nod politely, even though your Latin conjugations are rusty, and make a mental note to prepare for a shock. In the corner, a man wearing a tunic with a purple border indicating he is equestrian class complains loudly about the emperor's latest grain tax, while his friend, a freedman with curly hair, whispers about a new mosaic artist from North Africa. Their conversation slides seamlessly from politics to art to gossip about a gladiator named Commodus who supposedly winked at the emperor's wife. You chuckle softly. Some things never change. As you take in all these details, you realize that approaching the baths is like standing at the threshold of an ancient social network, where everything from politics to personal hygiene is on display. You can't help but feel slightly self-conscious. Will your hair frizz in the humidity? Is your toga draped properly? It's a good thing you're just a visitor here. Any fashion faux pas will evaporate with the steam. With a last look at the teeming entrance hall, you take a deep breath and prepare to deposit your belongings in the changing room, ready to be embraced by the warm air and noise inside. Just remember to keep an eye on that purse fliggin. The pickpocket is reputed to be quick as mercury. The faint chill that clings to the entrance hall vanishes as you make your way into the appetitorium, the changing room where your bathhouse experience truly begins. The room is huge, light streaming in from small clerestory windows, and its walls are lined with tiers of niches carved into marble, each marked with a painted number or symbol. You can almost imagine a Roman version of a locker room attendant shouting, "Don't forget your number." The floor beneath your feet glistens slightly from splashed water and oil, and you tread carefully so you don't accidentally reenact a slapstick slide in front of strangers. The air here is thick with the scent of olive oil, sun-warmed linen, and something unidentifiable, perhaps the lingering aroma of thousands of sandals and feet. You wrinkle your nose but try to embrace the authenticity. Ancient Romans, after all, embraced a level of communal intimacy that would make modern gym-goers clutch their towels closer. A capsarius, a slave assigned to guard patrons, clothing approaches, a thin bronze chain slung around his neck, holding dozens of small, numbered tags. He's wiry, with a quick smile and even quicker fingers, and he expertly ties a piece of twine around your belongings before handing you a bronze token with a numeral. "Don't lose that," he says, in quick Latin, and you nod, even though you already feel the nagging anxiety of misplacing your locker key in a sea of steaming bodies. The capsarius's job was coveted and despised. A trustworthy one can make good tips, while a dishonest one might end up having his hand slammed in a door as punishment for theft. Historians still argue whether some bathhouses provided official security or whether patrons had to bribe these attendants to look the other way. Either way, you slip your token into a fold of cloth, telling yourself not to drop it into the pool later. You begin removing your tunic, folding the coarse wool carefully to minimize wrinkles. Imagine the horror of being the only Roman with a rumpled toga. Your sandals come off next, and you set them neatly by your basket. You're suddenly aware of just how public this ritual is. Men of all ages and body types stand around stripping down to their sublicculum, the loincloth worn. Underneath, chatting as casually as if they were at a wine bar. A senator with a carefully curled beard is complaining that his friend wore the same fibula brooch as he did, while a baker with flour still clinging to his fingernails laughs about burning his morning loaves. There's a certain levity in the room, an unspoken agreement that everyone is equal here, except maybe for the soldier who still hasn't put down his sword. You catch yourself thinking about modern locker rooms and the unspoken rules of not making eye contact for too long. Clearly, some social anxieties transcend time. On a low table at the center of the room sits an array of amphorae filled with different grades of olive oil, some infused with herbs like marjoram or lavender, others tinted with saffron or rubbed with crushed snail shells for exfoliation. Soap as we know it isn't a common part of the Roman bathing ritual. Instead, oil is rubbed onto the skin to loosen dirt and sweat, and then scraped off with a curved bronze tool called the strigil. You dip your fingers into a jar of sweet-smelling oil and begin massaging it into your arms and chest. The texture is luxurious, heavy yet smooth, and you imagine this is what it feels like to prepare a salad, except you are the lettuce. A teenage boy next to you is vigorously working the oil into his shoulders while asking his friend whether the charioteers or gladiators will be more exciting this week. You smile at the scene. This place is part spa, part gossip hub, part ESPN zone dot as you rub oil into your skin. A man with a weathered face and a shock of gray hair tells an absurd story about how a famous charioteer once coated himself in donkey milk because he thought it made his skin shine like marble. His friends laugh, but someone points out that donkey milk baths were actually a thing Cleopatra was rumored to have indulged in them, though whether that's true is up for debate. There's even a jar of thick, creamy white substance near the oil jars, and you realize it's exactly that. Donkey milk lotion, preserved for those who want an extra layer of luxury. You consider it, wonder about smelling like a barn, and decide the olive oil is more your speed. One mainstream fact is undeniable. Romans cared about skincare long before influencers made it cool. You glance around and notice carved warnings. Above the niches, cave fur, beware of thieves. Apparently, public signage admonishing patrons to watch out for pickpockets is not just a modern thing. Thefts were so commonplace that upper-class Romans sometimes hired their own slave to stand guard while they bathed. The presence of the capsules offered some protection, but the temptation was always there. One quirky detail surfaces in your mind. Archaeologists have found curse tablets in which patrons called upon the gods to punish whoever stole their sandals. You silently vow to keep your belongings safe and resist the urge to craft a petty curse. In Latin, for anyone who dares touch your towel, an older man with a pot belly and a jovial face is generously applying perfumed oil behind his ears, regaling his neighbor with tales of his last trip to Ostia. They've got baths there too, he says, but nothing like this. Their hypocaust barely warms your toes. His companion nods sagely and replies that some provincial baths even incorporate local styles, like a round Celtic-style pool in Britain. Historians still argue whether provincial bath complexes tried to replicate Roman models exactly or adapted then to local tastes. The debate makes you think of modern franchises that adjust their menus for regional palates. Some things never change, even if the subject is communal bathing rather than hamburgers. Once you're coated in oil, you reach for a strigil, a small curved scraper that resembles a slender brass boomerang. It feels cool against your palm, and you test its edge on your forearm. In a moment, an attendant approaches, offering to assist. He's young, strong, and seems entirely comfortable with the task of scraping strangers. "Bene, bene," he says, waiting for your nod. You stand with your arms slightly away from your body as he runs the strigil over your skin, scraping off the oil along with dirt and dead skin. The sensation is oddly satisfying, like the ancient equivalent of peeling dried. Glue off your fingers and you resist the urge to giggle. Each stroke leaves your skin shining and warm, and you imagine what a dermatologist today would think. The attendant occasionally taps the strigil on a bucket, dislodging a brownish mixture of oil and grime that falls with a soft plop. You suddenly understand why the floor is so slick and why so many ancient texts mention accidents involving elderly bathers and slippery floors. If this were a modern spa, there would be rubber mats and liability waivers. Here, there's just marble and the possibility of a comedic pratfall dot as he works. The attendant makes small talk about the weather, hot, but not as hot as the Caldorium, the latest races at the Circus Maximus, and the behavior of Emperor Caracalla, who built these baths, but also has a reputation for being somewhat, well, temperamental. You nod and offer non-committal grunts, trying not to get oil in your mouth. He mentions, almost as an aside, that some people have started using a new Gallic soap made from tallow and ash. It lathers. He says, rolling his eyes dramatically. But who wants bubbles when you can have olive oil? Historians still debate the extent to which soap was used in the Roman world. Some evidence suggests that people in northern provinces used it more frequently than those in Italy. Here, in the heart of Rome, tradition reigns. Oil, scrape, repeat. A group of young men across the room begins to chant a bawdy song about Saturn and his love of feasting, and you can't help but smile at the double entendres. It's one of those light-hearted moments that humanize the distant past. Someone cracks a joke about the smell of the oil, at least it's better than garum, and the room erupts in laughter. You suddenly become aware that while your presence is anachronistic, your appreciation for crude jokes fits right in. This is, after all, the social hub of the ancient world, not a solemn temple. There is a certain camaraderie that forms when a group of people is standing around mostly naked, covered in oil, complaining about taxes. It's oddly comforting as you finish being scraped and hand the attendant a coin for his service. You catch sight of a small boy scampering between patrons, his fingers deftly exploring piles of clothing. A stern glance from the capsarius sends the boy scurrying out of reach. Clearly, he's been caught before. You clutch your bronze token reflexively. The capsarius, noticing your concern, leans in and whispers a piece of street wisdom. Always keep your token dry. If you drop it in the caldarium, you might as well kiss your toga goodbye. You nod gratefully, tucking the token deep into a fold of cloth. The ritual of oiling and scraping may be about cleanliness, but it's also wrapped up in cautionary tales and community trust, a strange combination of vulnerability and vigilance that feels very human. By the time you're ready to leave the appetitarium, your skin glows, your hair smells like a Mediterranean grove, and you're more intimately familiar with your fellow Romans than you ever intended. The path ahead leads to the exercise yard, the palestra, where you'll work up a proper sweat before plunging into icy water. For now, you take a deep breath, savor the mix of olive oil and incense that hangs in the air, and prepare yourself for the next stage in this ancient self-care routine. The moment you step out of the changing room, the hum of conversation is replaced by the rhythmic thud of bodies on sand and the grunts of exertion. The palestra sprawls before you like an ancient fitness influencer's playground, an open air courtyard encircled by colonnades, its floor covered with soft, well-raked sand. Sunlight pours down, heating the ground just enough that your feet sink comfortably with each step. On one side, a group of men are playing a fast-paced game of harpastum, a kind of Roman rugby, in which they use a stuffed leather bladder as a ball, and the rules seem to involve equal parts skill and dirty tricks. Two players wrestle over the ball, one trying to feint left before darting right, while the other tries to trip him by hooking his leg. You smile at the way spectators shout suggestions from the sidelines, some laughing and others mock groaning when a player eats sand. It feels as though you've stumbled into a friendly pickup game that's been running for centuries. You decide to try something less likely to dislocate your shoulder. So you pick up a pair of halter stone or bronze dumbbells shaped like hand weights used for long jump training. They fit comfortably in your palms, slightly rough from use, and you raise them above your head, feeling your muscles stretch. The young man beside you demonstrates a jumping exercise. He swings his arms back and then forward as he leaps, then draws them behind him mid-air to increase momentum. For longer jumps, he explains, and you nod, though you secretly wonder how many sprained ankles this has caused. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Roman physicians often recommended light exercise before bathing to warm the body and open the pores, so the subsequent oiling and scraping would be more effective. When you hear "open the pores," you can't help but think of modern spa adverts and chuckle. Nearby, two wrestlers square off on the sand, their bodies slick with oil. They circle each other, lungs expanding and contracting like bellows, then lunge into a grapple. One slips slightly on the sand, and the other capitalizes on the opportunity, flipping him onto his back with a practiced motion. Onlookers hoot and applaud, and the fallen wrestler bursts out laughing before hopping to his feet. As you watch, you're struck by how much camaraderie there is. No one seems to take themselves too seriously, though pride is certainly at stake. One older man flexes dramatically after completing a set of push-ups, looking around to see if anyone noticed. You stifle a laugh and decide not to challenge him to a plank contest, though part of you wants to brag about your modern gym membership dot over by the wall. A small group practices ball tossing, throwing a ball back and forth in increasingly elaborate arcs. The ball, made from stitched leather and stuffed with feathers, flies through the air, and one man intentionally lets it sail over his head so he can spin around and catch it behind his back, eliciting mock groans from his friends. Show off. Someone mutters, but there's a smile in his voice. A father teaches his young son to throw underhand, and the boy's serious expression as he concentrates on his form is endearing. You can't help but think of Little League games and weekend soccer practices, reminding you that some things truly are universal. A quirky fact pops into your mind. Ancient Romans also played a game called Trigon, a three-person ball game that required players to throw and catch rapidly and gracefully. If you dropped the ball, you had to endure jokes about butterfingers, or the Roman equivalent dot. As you explore the palestra, you notice various training tools that look suspiciously like ancient prototypes of modern gym equipment. There are thick ropes for tug-of-war exercises, wooden posts for practicing boxing and martial arts, and stone pillars that men use to practice twisting and lunging around. A man with a neatly trimmed beard is shadow boxing, his fists wrapped in leather. Thongs called cestus. These thongs could be studded with metal for actual matches, but in training they're plain, and he throws jabs at an imaginary opponent, preparing for the games. You ask, and he grins, revealing a missing tooth. Always, he replies, and goes back to his routine. You consider trying a few punches yourself, but decide to stick with the halters. After all, you still have the rest of the bathing ritual ahead. As you continue walking, a woman in a light tunic passes by carrying a small jug. She's one of the bathhouse attendants responsible for sprinkling water on the sand to keep dust down. She moves gracefully, her face flushed from the heat, and as she sprinkles water, the sand darkens slightly, releasing a faint earthy smell. You watch the pattern she creates, admiring the simple elegance of her work. Another attendant stops to adjust a rope net used for climbing exercises. You wonder aloud whether these nets were used for strength or agility, and a man overhearing you says both. The sailors taught us that. Historians still argue whether Roman exercise routines were directly influenced by Greek athletic practices or whether they developed organically from military training. The line between soldierly discipline and leisurely recreation seems fluid here. You decide to try your hand at the rope net. You grip the thick hemp strands and begin climbing, feeling the fibers bite into your fingers. The climb is invigorating, and as you near the top, you glance down and realize how high you've climbed. A small voice inside you says, "Don't look down," and you immediately look down. Your stomach does a little flip, and you carefully start to descend. Halfway down, a bead of sweat rolls into your eye, stinging slightly, and you blink rapidly. A friendly voice from below says, "Don't lose your grip. Last week, someone lost a sandal mid-climb. We're still looking for it." You laugh, though your heart beats faster for a moment. By the time you reach the ground, your arms feel pleasantly tired. At one edge of the palestra stands a raised platform with steps, where a philosopher in a faded toga sits surrounded by a small group of listeners. He gestures animatedly with his hands, arguing about the virtues of moderation in all things. You catch snippets of his speech. He warns against overindulgence in exercise and baths, quoting ancient authors. Remember moderation, he cautions, for even too much warm water can weaken the body. A wag in the crowd mutters something about moderation and taxes being preferable, earning a round of knowing laughter. This spontaneous lecture reminds you that bathhouses were not just places for physical exertion, but also hubs of intellectual and political discourse. There's a feeling of being in a living marketplace of ideas, where your neighbor might challenge you to a philosophical debate. Right after a game of harpastum, it's as if your local gym were combined with a university quad and a coffee shop. As you walk back toward the center, your path is momentarily blocked by a man sprinting by, his long hair streaming behind him, his arms pumping vigorously. Looks like he's training for an Olympic event, though the Olympics have long since moved to different venues. You step aside, and he passes with an expression of fierce concentration. His friend stands at the edge, shouting encouragement, then jokingly offers him a fig as he runs past. Energy food, he calls. The sprinter laughs breathlessly and keeps going. You make a mental note to bring a banana to your next cardio session, though you imagine your modern gym might frown upon fruit tosses between treadmills. As your time in the palestra winds down, you realize you've developed a light sheen of sweat, the kind that promises a satisfying bath. Oil glistens on your skin, capturing dust and grime, and your muscles feel loose and energized. You also feel an odd sense of community with your fellow Romans, like you've become part of an ancient group workout. You recall the mainstream historical fact that these exercises were intended to prepare the body for bathing, making the subsequent heat and scraping more effective at purifying the skin. You also recall a quirky tidbit you read somewhere. Some bathhouses hired musicians to play rhythmic tunes to accompany exercise, turning the palestra into a precursor of modern spin classes. The bikes dot as you prepare to leave the courtyard. You throw one last glance over your shoulder. The wrestling match continues. Someone screams victoriously after catching the ball one-handed, and the philosopher is now passionately debating whether the gods favor the blue chariot team or the green. You shake your head, smiling at the blending of sweat, sport, and serious discourse. Historians still argue whether Romans considered bathing an athletic pursuit or a social ritual, but from where you stand, it's clearly both. You pat a bit more oil onto your forearms, take a deep breath, and head toward the next chamber, ready for the icy shock that awaits in the frigidarium. Just remember to hold your breath and maybe squeal quietly. It's all part of the experience. The noise of the palestra fades as you enter a dimly lit hall that leads to the frigidarium. Immediately, a different atmosphere envelops you. The air cools perceptibly, and your oiled skin prickles with goosebumps and anticipation. Ahead, through an arched doorway, you see the glint of water. A large, rectangular pool carved from smooth marble, filled to the brim with water so clear it mirrors the ceiling frescoes above. The frigidarium's vaults are decorated with scenes of sea creatures and mythological water deities. Dolphins leap above waves while nymphs frolic around tridents. The pool itself looks like an inviting slab of liquid glass, though you know its temperature will be anything but inviting. You take a step closer, inhaling the smell of cool stone and faint mineral tang. A small group of young men are standing at the edge, psyching themselves up to leap in. They look like a group of teenagers daring each other to jump into a lake. At dawn, a broad-shouldered man with a cheerful grin strides past you, clasps his hands over his head like a diver, and launches himself into the pool with a loud whoop. The resulting splash arcs gracefully through the air, drenching the men still hesitating on the edge, who yelp and then laugh. "Just jump," he calls, his teeth chattering slightly. You peer over and see him surface, his face flushed, his hair plastered to his forehead. He sucks in a deep breath and shakes his head, beads of water flying. "It's fantastic," he declares, perhaps convincing himself as much as anyone else. The others exchange glances and then one by one follow, each jump accompanied by a shriek or a deep gasp. It's contagious, and you find yourself edging toward the marble steps that descend into the pool, aware that the longer you wait, the more dramatic your reaction will be. With a resigned grin, you decide to embrace the shock. You set your foot on the first step, letting the coldness seep up between your toes. Your breath catches. The next step sends a shiver up your spine. And by the third, you've made your peace with the fact that this pool is basically a giant jug of ancient refrigerated water. You tighten your core and plunge forward. The cold hits you like a slap, 1,000 tiny needles pricking your skin. For a moment, you forget to breathe, the sensation overriding any coherent thought. You surface with a gasp, pushing wet hair out of your eyes. There's a momentary panic. Did your token fall out of its hidden fold? But then you remember you left it back in the changing room. Your body adjusts to the temperature shock, and you notice the water's crisp clarity and how it seems to instantly tighten your pores. A mainstream fact you once read surfaces. Cold baths were believed to close the pores after the hot rooms, keeping the body's natural heat sealed in. Romans thought alternating between hot and cold strengthened the constitution. Like ancient hydrotherapy, the cold envelops you in a strangely invigorating hug. Your heart pounds, your teeth chatter, and yet after a few deep breaths, you start to feel almost serene. You paddle toward the side and notice a group of men leaning against the marble rim, calmly discussing politics as if they were sitting at a cafe. One mentions the latest speech in the forum, while another grumbles about grain prices. The juxtaposition of serious conversation with bare, goosebump-covered skin makes you smile. You paddle past them and overhear a heated discussion about whether the emperor's new coinage will devalue the denarius. Historians still argue whether economic debates in bathhouses ever influenced policy or whether they were just for venting frustration. The truth probably lies somewhere between. After all, more than one senator likely gauged public opinion while cooling off. Here, an older woman with silver-streaked hair, walks down the steps, her expression composed. She steps into the water with a small gasp but doesn't flinch, perhaps having been through this countless times. She settles herself on a submerged bench along the wall and closes her eyes. A younger woman follows, more timid, dipping her toe and then squealing as if the water has turned into ice. The older woman cracks one eye open and smiles. The debate over whether women bathed in separate spaces or at separate time surfaces. Some sources suggest strict separation, while others hint at more casual arrangements. It may have varied by region and era. As a modern visitor, you're simply grateful for the glimpses into daily life that these anecdotes provide. While you're acclimating, a youth with curly hair leans in and whispers a conspiratorial secret. "Some say there's fish in here," he says, eyes wide. You glance down reflexively, expecting to see fins or tails. Of course, there are none. He grins and explains that the rumor is just a joke to scare newcomers. You laugh, shaking your head. It's a classic prank, convincing someone that something unexpected lurks in the water. You file this under quirky tidbits that you'll share later with a friend who thinks ancient history is dry. Another man interjects that in some smaller baths, they did keep ornamental fish for decoration, but never in the pools used for bathing. Regardless, you find yourself glancing at the water a few more times just in case. Paranoia is universal. 2. You float on your back for a moment, staring up at the ceiling frescoes. The cold constricts your muscles, making you feel simultaneously hyper-aware and detached. You focus on the painted dolphins above, noticing the delicate brushstrokes and the way the artist captured the sense of motion. The water cradles you like a firm mattress. Someone near you attempts a backflip off the side, fails spectacularly, and surfaces spluttering. His friends cheer and taunt him, calling him Circus Maximus Acrobat. You chuckle and consider whether to attempt your own trick before remembering. You are a time-traveling guest with no health insurance. After a few minutes, you begin to feel a pleasant numbness. Your fingers and toes tingle, and your breathing slows. You recall that the cold plunge isn't meant to be long, just enough to close pores and invigorate the body. You paddle toward the steps and haul yourself out, water streaming down your limbs and dripping onto the marble. A slave hands you a small linen towel, and you pat yourself dry. It's a quick towel, not luxurious by any means, just enough to keep water from dripping everywhere. You shiver slightly, but the air now feels warm compared to the frigid water. As you stand there, someone cracks a joke about how you look like a fish gasping for air, and you waggle your eyebrows in mock offense. Humor helps mask the cold. A man standing next to you mentions that some physicians claim the cold bath could cure headaches and fevers, while others warned it might send you straight into an early grave. Historians still argue whether the benefits of cold plunges were more psychological than physiological, but there is no doubt that Romans loved the feeling. You nod, thinking of modern cryotherapy spas that tout similar benefits and command a far higher price than a quadrans. Someone else chimes in that Emperor Caligula allegedly filled his bath with mountain snow once, just to make a point about his wealth. Whether or not that story is true, you imagine the logistics of transporting snow into Rome and marvel at ancient logistics. Meanwhile, the man who just attempted the backflip swears he's warmed up and ready to try again, and his friends groan in anticipation. You stand at the edge, watching as others continue to come and go. A group of elderly men enters the frigidarium slowly, their hands on each other's shoulders, forming a chain of moral support. They step down together and collectively hiss as the cold reaches their knees. One mutters, "You'd think after 60 years this would get easier," eliciting laughter from his companions. You find yourself laughing too, touched by their camaraderie. You realize that community is the heart of this place. People of different ages and backgrounds share the same experiences. From the quick intake of breath of the cold water to the joke about fish in the pool. When you've warmed slightly and your teeth have stopped chattering, you decide it's time to move on. You glance back at the frigidarium one last time, appreciating its role in ancient hydrotherapy. The water glistens, reflecting the painted sea creatures above, and you think about how many people over centuries have stood where you stand, psyching themselves up for the plunge. You smile, grateful for the absurd yet invigorating experience, and turn toward the next doorway where warmth and steam beckon. A whisper of anticipation flutters in your chest. The tepidarium awaits, promising a gentler embrace after the cold shock. With a final shake of your arms and a deep breath, you step toward that promise. As you leave the frigidarium and head toward the tepidarium, your body begins to thaw. The corridor you walk through transitions from cool stone to a pleasantly warm space, like moving from an air-conditioned office into a sunlit garden. The doorway ahead opens into a medium-sized chamber that glows with a soft amber light. The tepidarium is a transitional room, gently heated, designed to ease your body between extremes. Its walls are lined with polished marble panels veined with green and gold, and its domed ceiling is decorated with delicately painted vines and pomegranates. Gentle light filters in from high windows, illuminating the air, which shimmers with warmth. The floor is comprised of smooth tiles that radiate heat thanks to the hypocaust system below. As you step onto them, warmth travels up through your solace, warming your bones. The tepidarium is abuzz with low chatter and contented sighs. Some patrons recline on marble benches along the walls, while others sit at small tables playing dice games. In one corner, a musician plucks softly at a cithara, providing a soothing soundtrack that blends seamlessly with the gentle murmuring of voices. The humidity here is moderate. Your skin, still cold from the plunge, begins to warm and glow. You catch a whiff of sweet fragrances, perhaps frankincense or myrrh-burning in braziers placed strategically around the room. The atmosphere feels like a spa waiting area, albeit one carved entirely from marble and decorated with priceless art. A mainstream fact floats to your mind. The tepidarium served as a place to acclimate, allowing bathers to raise their body temperature slowly before entering the hotter caldarium. It also functioned as a social hub where men and women, if allowed, could relax and converse without the shock of extreme temperatures. You settle into a niche in the wall, the marble warm against your back, and let out a sigh that you didn't know you'd been holding. Around you, conversations range from the mundane to the philosophical. A merchant complains about the rising cost of olive oil, while a young woman describes an unusual fish she saw at the market. You smile, considering how the same topics, money and food, dominate small talk and modern lounges. On the floor, embedded at intervals, are sections of intricate mosaic depicting scenes from mythology. Near your seat, a mosaic shows Orpheus charming animals with his lyre. The tesserae, tiny tiles of colored glass and stone, are placed with such precision that his fingers appear to move. As you gaze at it, your fingertips tingle, feeling the skill of the artisan through the ages. Across from you, another mosaic depicts a satyr chasing a nymph with a sly grin, his expression one of mischievous pursuit. It's tastefully risque, and you laugh quietly at the ancient sense of humor. Historians still argue whether such imagery was intended purely as decoration or if it had symbolic meaning about fertility and vitality. Either way, it certainly keeps things interesting. Beside you, two men are having an animated discussion about the merits of different oils used in the caldarium. Imported Syrian oil is the best, asserts one, gesturing with a hand for emphasis. It's lighter and doesn't clog pores. His friend rolls his eyes, counters that local Italian oil is purer and less adulterated, and the debate grows more heated. You half expect them to start an olive oil tasting on the spot. A quirky detail emerges as an older woman chimes in. My aunt swears by mixing her oil with powdered pumice, it keeps her skin soft and banishes wrinkles. You file this tidbit away with donkey milk baths and snail shells. Someone else pipes up that adding saffron to oil gives skin a golden glow, though historians still debate whether saffron was commonly affordable or reserved for the wealthy. The conversation makes you marvel at how far back skincare routines go. Sephora would have thrived in Rome. You take a deep breath, letting the warmth soak into your muscles, and notice a boy carrying a small amphora filled with perfumed water. He walks around, gently sprinkling it onto the marble floor, releasing steam when it hits the warm tiles. The scent of roses rises around you, mingling with the incense. Across the room, a man with a thin face is reading a wax tablet, his stylus tapping against his teeth as he concentrates. He looks up occasionally, seemingly lost in thought, before returning to his writing. Perhaps he's composing a poem, or drafting a speech for the Senate. The bathhouse is a place where politics, poetry, and personal grooming converge. Overhead, you notice small round glass discs inserted into the ceiling. They catch the sunlight and diffuse it down into the room, creating soft pools of light that move as clouds pass. This small detail reveals the architectural ingenuity of the Romans. These discs, called specularia, were an early form of skylight, often made from mica or even thin sheets of glass. They allowed light in while keeping heat from escaping. You. Imagine the builder who thought to include them and smile at how proud he must have felt. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly invented glass windows or adapted the technology from elsewhere, but the effect here is undeniably beautiful. As you stretch your legs, a slave approaches with a tray of small cups. Water with lemon and honey, he says, offering one to you. You accept gratefully, bringing the cup to your lips. The taste is crisp and sweet, the citrus cutting through the humidity. It's a simple luxury that makes the entire experience feel decadent. A man on your left jokes that the water is probably from the aqueduct that runs through his backyard. His friend counters that his water is fresher because it comes from the Aqua Claudia. You laugh, thinking about modern debates over tap versus bottled water. Some things truly never change. A young woman sitting nearby begins to hum softly. The tune familiar, though you can't place it. She closes her eyes, swaying slightly to the rhythm. The warm air and the sound of her humming create a hypnotic effect, and you feel your eyelids droop. You briefly imagine falling asleep right here and drooling onto the polished marble, and you stifle a giggle at the thought. Instead, you shift slightly, adjusting your posture so you don't slump like a drowsy cat. A mainstream fact flits through your mind. Some Romans spent hours in the Tepidarium, using it as a place to meet friends and clients, much like modern coffee shops. You realize that if Wi-Fi had been invented, there would likely be someone here checking their emails on a wax tablet. In one corner, a group of women whisper and laugh, glancing occasionally at a young man across the room. He pretends not to. Notice them adjusting his hair and flexing his arms at opportune moments. The flirtation is obvious yet innocent, and it adds a playful note to the warm air. You recall reading that the Emperor Hadrian once banned mixed bathing because of scandals. In the Tepidarium, though historians still argue whether such bans were strictly enforced or routinely ignored, rules, after all, are only as strong as people's willingness to follow them. The interplay of genders here feels both regulated and fluid, depending on who is watching. A man in his 40s sits down next to you, sighs deeply, and says, "This is the best part, not too hot, not too cold." You agree, nodding. He points to a series of small, carved niches in the wall. "Do you see those?" he asks. Some people leave little figurines or coins there, offerings to Fortuna for good. Luck. You lean closer and indeed see tiny votive figurines and a few coins glinting in the dim light. It's another example of how spirituality permeates everyday life. Even in a bathhouse, people seek divine favor. The man shrugs and adds, "I just leave extra oil. The gods know what I need." You chuckle at his practicality and wonder whether the gods appreciate donations of MOISTURICR. After lingering in the Tepidarium long enough to feel thoroughly warmed and a bit drowsy, you sense it's time to move on. The next room, the caldarium, waits with its thick steam and intense heat. You lift yourself from your comfortable niche, stretch your limbs, and take a final sip of honeyed water. As you head toward the next doorway, you catch sight of an older woman gently placing a small clay figurine into one of the niches. Her eyes are closed, lips moving silently in prayer, perhaps asking for good health, or maybe for her grandchildren to listen for once. You walk past quietly, respecting her moment, and step into the corridor leading to the hottest room in the thermi. Your body is ready to embrace the heat and whatever quirks come with it. Though you make a mental note to watch your step boil in steam, can be a slippery combination. The corridor grows warmer with each step, and soon a dense, moist heat envelops you like a heavy cloak. You feel the air change even before you enter the caldarium, the hottest room in the bathhouse, where steam curls in thick waves and the scent of warmed oil hangs in the air. You step through the doorway and are greeted by a wall of heat so intense that your skin tingles. The room is vast, the ceiling domed and painted with swirling patterns of fire and water, reflecting the dual nature of the space, oppressive heat, meant to cleanse and purify. The floor is marble, but it's raised on hollow pillars through which hot air circulates, turning the surface into a giant radiant heater. You take a cautious step and feel warmth seeping through the soles of your feet. It's not as blistering as you feared, but definitely not a place you'd want to linger without a towel. At the center of the caldarium sits a large, sunken pool, the alveus filled with steaming water. Patrons lounge in it like contented crocodiles, half submerged, their heads resting on the marble edge. The steam rising from the surface forms swirling patterns, briefly obscuring faces before dissipating upward. Along one wall, a series of stone benches provide seating for those who prefer to bask in the heat without submerging themselves. On another side, braziers filled with glowing coals burn steadily, feeding the furnace below that powers the hypocaust system. The atmosphere is thick and almost tangible. Each breath you take feels saturated with warmth. You make your way to the pool's edge, the heat causing beads of sweat to form instantly on your forehead. The air is laden with the earthy aroma of olive oil, mixed with hints of rosemary and lavender. You dip a toe into the water, hot but bearable, and lower yourself in. The shock is immediate. Where the frigidarium's water stabbed you with cold, the caldarium envelops you with a deep warmth that penetrates your muscles. You feel your pores opening again, counteracting the closing effect of the cold plunge, and your body relaxes into the sensation. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Romans believed this alternation between extremes was key to maintaining health, cleansing impurities, and improving circulation. Modern spas echo this belief with saunas and cold plunges, though they charge substantially more than a quadrans. You lean back against the smooth marble ledge, closing your eyes as steam wafts around you. Voices nearby drift in and out of clarity as the steam rises and falls. One man recounts a story about how the emperor himself once visited these baths incognito, listening to complaints disguised as an ordinary citizen. Another corrects him, saying it was actually Emperor Nero who disguised himself, not Caracalla. The discussion turns into a friendly argument, each man citing different sources. One insists he read it on a plaque at the forum, while the other swears his father told him. Historians still argue whether emperors truly mingled anonymously with their subjects, or if such stories were moralizing myths. But the image is entertaining nonetheless. An attendant approaches, holding a wooden bucket filled with hot water. He pours it over a pile of heated stones, sending a fresh wave of steam into the room. The steam curls toward the ceiling, carrying with it the scent of burning herbs. The man sitting across from you inhales deeply and says, that's time good. For the lungs. You nod, though you're not entirely sure you want to test ancient aromatherapy with your modern sinuses. He then points to a small amphora at the edge of the pool and says, if you're feeling brave, add a splash of garum. Clears the sinuses right out. You both laugh, knowing that fermented fish sauce is best kept far from any spa treatment. It's one of those jokes that transcends time. Nobody wants to bathe in fish sauce. A slave walks by carrying a tray of brown strigils and cloths. He offers you one, and you accept, running the curved metal blade over your skin to remove sweat and excess oil. The sensation is smoother than in the appetiterium. The heat of the room softens your skin, making the scraping almost luxurious. The slave returns regularly to empty a small bucket filled with the mixture of oil, sweat, and grime. You watch the viscous mixture pour out and think of the gross yet satisfying videos of pore extractions that proliferate on social media. You wonder if Romans would have been equally fascinated or just grossed out. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some Roman bathhouses collected this mixture and sold it as a cosmetic called strigmentum, which wealthy women allegedly used as a beauty product. The thought makes you chuckle and cringe simultaneously. Around you, patrons engage in various forms of relaxation. One man is meticulously trimming his beard with a tiny iron razor while his friend holds up a polished bronze mirror. Another is performing a kind of yoga stretch, balancing precariously on one foot while reaching toward the ceiling. A group sits on a bench, leaning forward with towels draped over their heads, inhaling the steam like a modern spa's eucalyptus treatment. They discuss with surprising passion the relative merits of different gladiators. I tell you, the Thracian style is superior, insists one, slapping his thigh for emphasis. No, counters another. The Secur's helmet gives him the advantage. You resist the urge to shout, Team Radieris, and instead smile at the intensity of their fandom. It's like listening to sports fans dissect a game, only with more swords and tridents. Despite the heat, you shiver slightly as a draft sweeps through the room. You glance around and see that there are small vent windows near the ceiling, which attendants occasionally open to control the temperature. The way the Romans engineered airflow in these massive spaces is remarkable. Reed pipes and bronze valves direct water into the pools, while precisely placed vents regulate steam. You recall reading that the hypocaust system required constant maintenance, with slaves tending the fires in tunnels beneath the floor. Historians still debate how many slaves were needed to keep a bathhouse running smoothly. Some estimate dozens, others hundreds, depending on the size and extravagance of the complex. Young woman dips into the pool and immediately exclaims, "By the gods, it's like bathing in Vulcan's forge." You laugh and reply that at least you'll be purified by fire. She grins, adjusting her hair, and mentions that she's heard of a wealthy matron who supposedly had her own private caldarium at home. "Imagine having this to yourself," she says wistfully. You consider the idea and realize it would be like having a private spa in your house, minus the community gossip and impromptu philosophy lectures. Then again, if you were that wealthy, you could probably pay philosophers to visit your home anyway. On a bench nearby, a physician in the dark tunic speaks to a patient about his cough. He advises him to spend more time in the caldarium to clear his lungs and prescribes a mixture of honey and vinegar to drink afterward. And avoid sleeping in wet hair, he adds, wagging his finger. Another man sitting within earshot chimes, and with his grandmother's remedy involving warm goose fat. The physician rolls his eyes but smiles. It's a reminder that while Roman medicine had its rational elements, it was also a melting pot of home remedies and superstition. This interplay surfaces in how bathhouses served as communal health centers where people sought advice, both professional and amateur. After a while, you begin to feel the heat building inside your head like a rising tide. Sweat beads at your temples and your heartbeat slows into a steady, deep rhythm. It's time to leave before you turn into a cooked artichoke. You slowly stand, water streaming down your limbs, and climb out of the pool, moving toward a nearby fountain. You take a sip of cool water from the fountain spout, the chill and instantaneous relief. As you wipe your face, someone cracks a joke about looking like a boiled fish, and you answer with a mock glare. Humor flows as freely as the water here, an essential part of the experience. You head toward the exit, glancing back one last time at the shimmering pool. Steam swirls around the mosaic of a volcano painted on the wall, its stylized flames echoing the heat you feel inside. Your skin glows, your muscles feel like melted wax, and your mind drifts pleasantly. You step through the doorway into a corridor that will lead you to the massage area and the next stage of your bathhouse odyssey. You're ready for someone else to do the work of kneading and oiling your muscles, while you simply lie there and enjoy the gossip, the jokes, and the sensation of being pampered like a minor deity. Perhaps you'll even learn another quirky beauty secret to add to your growing collection, though you'll skip the fish sauce scrub. Leaving the caldorium feels like stepping out of a sauna into a warm summer evening. Your skin still radiates heat, and the air outside seems cooler in comparison. You walk down a passageway lined with marble statues of reclining gods and nymphs, toward the area dedicated to massage and oil rituals. The corridor opens into a room suffused with soft light and the scent of exotic spices. Cushioned benches line the walls, draped with linen sheets. Low tables hold bottles of oils infused with herbs, flowers, and resins, their scents mingling into a pleasant aromatic tapestry. This is where the magic of ancient spa treatments happens, where skilled hands knead away tension and gossip flows as freely as the oil. Young attendant with nimble fingers guides you to an empty bench and gestures for you to lie down. You comply, feeling the linen cool against your warm skin. The attendant begins by drizzling a stream of oil down your back. The sensation is both ticklish and soothing, like warm honey being poured slowly over your spine. The oil is thicker than the plain olive oil you rubbed on earlier. It's infused with crushed rose petals and a touch of almond, lending a subtle sweetness. Your mind wanders briefly to modern aromatherapy with its essential oil diffusers and debates about efficacy. You decide that whether or not it's scientifically beneficial, it certainly smells nice. With deft strokes, the attendant works the oil into your skin, starting at your shoulders and moving down to your lower back. His hands are strong, his thumbs expertly finding knots you didn't know existed. "You have tension here," he remarks casually, pressing on a particularly tight spot. You chuckle and think about all the stress that comes with time traveling. He then uses a twisting motion, working the oil deeper. You feel your muscles soften under his touch, like clay warming in the sun. A mainstream fact surfaces: massages and Roman baths were not only for relaxation. They were believed to improve circulation and prepare the body for the final cool down, preventing chills. Physicians often recommended them as part of a healthy lifestyle. As the attendant continues, he engages you in light conversation, asking where you're from, an innocent question that makes you pause. You decide to say you're from the Aventine Hill, which seems plausible, and he nods knowingly, mentioning a bakery there with excellent honey cakes. You file that away for later. He then launches into a story about a man who fell asleep during a massage, snored so loudly that he woke himself up, and claimed he'd heard thunder. The story prompts laughter from nearby benches. You join in, adding that you once snored so loudly that you scared your cat. This prompts confusion. "What's a cat?" Someone whispers, followed by another joke about Roman alley cats yelling. At night, the room fills with chuckles. Humor is the oil that lubricates social interactions here, making everyone feel at ease while half-dashed naked. As your massage progresses, the attendant changes oils, switching to one infused with spikenard, a plant imported from the Himalayas and prized for its earthy scent. He explains that spikenard is believed to calm the mind and banish nightmares, though historians still argue whether such claims had any basis beyond marketing. You decide it can't hurt to smell nice and sleep well. He also points out a small jar containing what looks like golden syrup. "Smell mucus," he whispers conspiratorially. "Very good for smoothing wrinkles." You nearly laugh out loud, remembering modern skincare products boasting snail secretions. Clearly, marketing has been recycling ideas for millennia. Quirky tidbits like this make you appreciate the continuity between ancient and modern beauty. Obsessions. As he works on your arms, kneading oil into your biceps, you glance around the room. Two men nearby are discussing the latest performances at the amphitheater. "Did you hear about the pantomime who tripped over his own mask?" One asks, shaking his head. "They say he managed to turn it into part of the act." Another man chimes in, complaining about a philosopher who monopolized the baths last week, lecturing on stoicism so long that everyone in the caldarium fell asleep. A woman across the room responds that falling asleep during a stoic lecture sounds appropriate. You grin, enjoying the way intellectual debate and slapstick gossip coexist here. These massages are as much about conversation as they are about physical relaxation. Halfway through, the attendant pulls out a slender bronze tool with a small spoon at one end. You recognize it from your reading, an ear picker. He gently cleans your ears, a practice considered essential to health and hygiene. The sensation is both weird and strangely satisfying. He then uses a smooth bone instrument to clean under your nails. You appreciate the thoroughness. Grooming was a big deal here. A mainstream fact, Romans equated cleanliness with civilization. To be well-groomed was to demonstrate your status and respectability. You think back to the curse tablets, cursing thieves of sandals, and wonder if anyone ever curses someone for leaving earwax on the bench dot at the next bench. An older woman is receiving a massage from a younger female attendant. They talk quietly about remedies for aches and pains. The older woman swears by a poultice of ground mustard seeds for stiff joints. The attendant recommends vinegar and salt. Nearby, a man boasts about a new oil he purchased from Alexandria, infused with cinnamon and myrrh. It makes you smell like a pharaoh, he says dramatically. His friend retorts that he'll believe it when he sees him building pyramids. The casual mixing of cultural references reminds you of Rome's vast trade network. Oils and spices from across the empire and beyond made their way into these ritual treatments. Historians still debate whether the average Roman could afford such luxuries or if they were the preserve of the elite. Judging by the diversity of scents around you, it seems variety existed even for those with modest means, though the premium ingredients were likely reserved for special occasions. As your attendant moves to your legs, he kneads your calves and thighs with expert precision, loosening tension you didn't realize you had. You mention that your feet might not be a pretty sight after walking the cobblestones of Rome all day. He laughs and assures you he's seen worse. He recounts that once, he massaged a senator who hadn't washed his feet properly after visiting the latrine. I prayed to Fortuna for patience that day, he jokes. You and your neighbors groan in sympathy. The conversation then turns to superstitions. Another attendant mentions that some patrons refuse to have their left arm massaged. First, because it invites bad luck. Historians still argue whether such superstitions were widespread or localized to certain families. You decide to let him finish your right leg first, just in case. To finish, your attendant sprinkles a pinch of finely ground pumice over your skin and gently buffs it with a cloth, leaving your body feeling smooth and invigorated. You ask about this final step, and he explains that pumice removes any lingering oil and dead skin, giving you a glow. He glances at you and adds, "Of course, you were already glowing from the caldarium." Flattery will get you everywhere, you think, though you can't help but enjoy the compliment. He hands you a clean linen cloth to drape around yourself and helps you sit up slowly. The room swims slightly as your body adjusts to a vertical position, but the sensation passes quickly. Before you leave, he asks if you'd like a dash of perfume. You nod, and he dabs a drop of essence behind your ears. It smells of pine resin and citrus. For protection, he says with a wink. You stand, feeling lighter and more fluid, as if your limbs are made of warm wax. You thank him, slipping him a small coin, and he bows slightly in gratitude. Around you, others are finishing their massages, their conversations tapering off as they prepare to move on. You hear someone mention the next stop, the social heart of the baths, where the real gossip happens. You smile, thinking back to the donkeys, the snail mucus, the ear pickers, and the snail milk. Your time here has been a mix of pampering, ridiculous beauty tips, and new friends dot as you leave the massage area, draped in your linen cloth. You pass by a small niche in the wall where someone has placed a tiny figurine of Venus. Perhaps they're thanking the goddess for good skin or good conversation. You decide to mentally thank her yourself, then step through the doorway into the next chamber. You're ready to immerse yourself in the chatter of Rome, to listen to politics, jokes, and whispered secrets as you cool down. After all, the baths are not just about cleaning the body, they're about connecting with others, and the next room is where tongues wag like strigils scraping oil. The corridor from the massage room leads you into a spacious hall where the temperature is markedly cooler. This is the social core of the therme, where bathers gather to talk, plot, laugh, and occasionally hatch plans that might change the course of Roman history, or so the rumors go. The room is rectangular with high ceilings supported by red-veined marble columns. Around the perimeter, marble benches invite people to sit and converse, while in the center, low tables host dice games and board games like tabula, a precursor to backgammon. The atmosphere crackles with the energy of so many voices at once, each one adding to the collective hum. Your skin still carries the warmth of the caldarium and the scent of spikenard, but the cooler air feels refreshing, like stepping out of a sauna into a shaded garden dot. You find a spot on a bench between two men deep in conversation. One is a burly ex-legionary with a thick scar across his forearm. The other wears a toga with a narrow purple stripe, indicating equestrian status. They're engaged in a spirited debate about a law proposed in the Senate. "It'll never pass," says the ex-legionary, shaking his head. "Too much opposition from the grain merchants?" His companion counters, "Nonsense. The emperor supports it. He wants the provinces more invested in Rome." You listen, fascinated. It's like eavesdropping on a political talk show, except both pundits are half naked and covered in oil residue. A mainstream fact surfaces. Bathhouses were indeed places where politics were discussed and deals were struck. Some historians suggest more decisions were made here than in official forums. You wonder how many treaties were hammered out over towels and snacks. On the table in front of them lies a set of polished ivory knuckle bones and a small gaming board. They take turns, rolling, laughing when the other throws poorly. "The dice are cursed," declares the legionary, pointing accusingly at the bones. "You bought cheap dice," retorts his friend. "They're weighted in favor of Fortuna and against you." You chuckle quietly at this, reminded of people blaming video game lag for their losses. Games were serious business here. Gambling was technically illegal, but games of chance were tolerated as long as stakes remained friendly. A quirky tidbit: Romans often inscribed their dice with spells to bring luck or to curse their opponent. You imagine someone secretly etching "May your toga stain" on a dying grin. Across the room, a group of women sits together on a bench, whispering behind their hands and occasionally bursting into laughter. You catch snippets of their conversation: a neighbor's scandalous affair, a feast ruined by burned fish, a new hairstyle that everyone must try. You lean back, enjoying the rhythm of the words, even when you don't catch every detail. One of them mentions a magistrate's wife being seen at the market buying a suspiciously large quantity of saffron. She's either cooking a feast or casting a love spell. One jokes, and the others giggle. Historians still argue whether love spells were genuinely believed or just fodder for gossip, but the fact they come up here suggests they were part of the social fabric. On another bench, an elderly scholar with a wax tablet on his lap scribbles notes. He pauses periodically, chewing on the end of his stylus, then looks up and interjects a comment into a nearby conversation about architecture. "The new aqueduct will bring cleaner water from the mountains," he says, to no one in particular. "They say it will reach every district." A baker, likely interested in water quality for his dough, turns and asks, "Every district?" "Even the Subura?" The scholar nods. "Even the Subura." You know that Subura was one of Rome's poorer districts, notorious for its noise and crime. The idea of fresh, clean water reaching everyone is optimistic historians still argue. Whether such promises were ever fulfilled or were just part of civic propaganda. Nevertheless, conversations like these show that infrastructure projects were as much a topic of small talk as celebrity gossip. The man next to you leans closer and whispers a joke about a politician with such a weak grip that he couldn't open the door to the caldarium. "Maybe that's why his policies are so limp," he adds, and you stifle a laugh. Another man overhears and counters with a joke about a gladiator who spent so much time at the baths that he forgot how to hold a sword. The jokes are groan-worthy, but delivered with such relish that you can't help but laugh anyway. Humor is a social lubricant here, making the mixing of classes smoother. After all, if you can share a laugh with a senator, maybe you can share an opinion on tax reform. A young man with curly hair and mischievous eyes sits down on your other side and casually asks if you've heard the latest rumor about the emperor's new mistress. You raise your eyebrows and shake your head. He leans in, clearly enjoying his role as gossip monger, and spins a tale so elaborate it makes modern tabloid stories look like restrained reportage. By the end, he has the emperor disguising himself as a wine cellar to woo her, only to trip over a basket of olives. You laugh, but then he adds, "Of course, historians still argue whether any of it is true." The phrase has become a running joke in your mind. You wonder if this bathhouse has its own resident fact-checker who pops out of the steam to say, "Actually," in the center of the room, a small platform has been set up, and a man stands on it reciting poetry. His voice is rich, his gestures theatrical. He declaims a passage from Ovid, drawing approving murmurs from the crowd. A woman fans herself with a poem frond and sighs dramatically when he reaches a romantic line. Moments later, a street performer leaps onto the platform and performs a comic dance, balancing a bowl on his head while imitating a pompous senator. The crowd roars with laughter. The juxtaposition of high art and slapstick is delightful. You're reminded of modern talent shows where opera and stand-up comedy share the same stage. The bathhouse is an egalitarian space where serious and silly coexist comfortably. As the performer exits, a philosophically inclined man begins lecturing to anyone who will listen about the Stoic concept of apatheia, freedom from passion. Someone interrupts him mid-sentence, asking if apatheia includes freedom from taxes. Laughter erupts, the philosopher smiles thinly and continues. You know that ancient people love to poke fun at philosophers just as modern people do with academics. Meanwhile, across the room, a group of teenagers practice their rhetorical skills, taking turns presenting arguments and rebuttals, their friends scoring them with imaginary laurel wreaths. You watch, fascinated, thinking about how debate clubs have existed for millennia, though these lack podiums and microphones. A man in his 50s, wearing a gold ring that suggests wealth, suddenly raises his voice. "Hear me, everyone. I am sowing my vineyard in Campania." Conversation quiets as people turn to listen. He describes the vineyard in lush detail. Fertile soil, gentle slopes, excellent yield. "Why are you selling?" asks someone. He shrugs. "I am moving to Hispania. Too many taxes here." Laughter ripples through the room. Deals are struck as easily as jokes here. The bathhouse is a marketplace of ideas and goods. You wonder how many properties have changed hands over casual conversation on these benches. As you sit among these groups, you feel the threads of countless lives weaving around you. People come here to clean, to heal, to show off, to gossip, to network, to rest. The bathhouse is Rome in miniature, messy, and magnificent. A mainstream fact surfaces. Some emperors built baths as a way to gain favor with the populace. By providing these communal spaces, they fostered goodwill. A quirky detail follows. The Emperor Elagabalus reportedly had his servants release exotic animals in the baths to surprise patrons. Imagine soaking and suddenly seeing a flamingo. Historians still argue whether that really happened or if it was a tale invented by his enemies to paint him as extravagant and eccentric. You realize you've been sitting for some time, engrossed in the swirl of conversation. Your body has cooled down, and you feel a pleasant tiredness settling into your limbs. It might be time to check whether your belongings are still safe and head to the next phase of your bath experience. You stand slowly, stretch your arms overhead, and make your way through the crowd. As you leave, you catch snippets of conversation that make you smile. Someone complaining about a neighbor's rooster, another praising a bread baker's new honey glaze, a woman mentioning the scarcity of purple dye. Each thread is a glimpse into daily life, woven seamlessly into the tapestry of the baths. You carry these voices with you as you head toward a quieter room where you've heard the sexes bathe separately and talk takes on a different tone. After all, you're curious to see how the women of Rome enjoy their bath time and what stories they tell when the men aren't listening. A small sign, painted with a discreet symbol of a female figure, marks the entrance to the women's section of the baths. You pass under it and immediately notice a different energy in the air. The temperature is cooler than the caldarium, but warmer than the frigidarium, and the chatter has a distinct tone higher pitched, interspersed with laughter and the occasional admonishment. The women's bathing area is smaller and more intimate, with cozier chambers and slightly lower ceilings adorned with frescoes depicting Venus and other goddesses. The marble is veined with soft pink hues, and the lighting seems gentler filtered through alabaster windows. The atmosphere feels simultaneously lively and soothing, like a secret club where everyone can relax without pretense. You step into a room where a group of women are lounging in a heated pool, their hair pinned up with bronze and ivory pins. They greet you with nods and smiles, then return to their conversation. "Did you hear?" One says. "Julius' son wore his toga inside out at the forum." The others gasp and laugh. "He must have had too much wine," another replies. The topics range from household matters to the latest fads, such as a new way to wrap the pala cloak that doesn't slip off the shoulders. You realize that while the subjects differ, the essence of sharing stories and laughter is universal. A mainstream fact: Roman women often bathed at different times from men or in separate areas, especially after the Emperor Hadrian's edict that banned mixed bathing except during festivals. Historians still argue how strictly these rules were enforced, but it's clear that at least in this part of the complex, women enjoy a space of their own. As you wade into the warm water, you listen to an older woman recount a story about her mother-in-law's early days in Rome. When she arrived, she says, she thought these baths were scandalous. "In my village, we bathed in the river behind tall reeds." The women laugh, and someone quips that reeds offer no gossip. The conversation shifts to beauty tips. One young woman shares her recipe for a face mask made from figs and honey. Another swears by crushed pearl mixed with vinegar to lighten freckles. You tuck away these tips, considering a future skincare line called Ancient Secrets, Figs in Pearl Edition. A quirky tidbit emerges when a woman reveals she uses crocodile dung mixed with goat's milk as a depilatory. The room erupts in shrieks of mock horror and fascination. You had heard of crocodile dung used in contraceptive pessaries, but body hair removal is a new application. The creativity of ancient cosmetology knows no bounds. A mother with a toddler sits on a ledge near the pool, dipping her feet while her child splashes happily. The little boy's laughter echoes off the marble walls. Nearby, Two teenagers whisper and giggle, their voices barely above the sound of the water. They're discussing a handsome fishmonger they both secretly admire. He has strong arms from lifting baskets, one says dreamily. The other sighs and murmurs something about his curly hair. It seems even in a culture where arranged marriages are common, young hearts still flutter over good-looking merchants. A matron catches them and teases, "Be careful, or your fathers will hear." They blush and sink deeper into the water. It's a reminder that adolescence has always been awkward and full of crushes. At one end of the room, a small altar holds offerings to Venus. Votive's tiny clay figurines, flowers, and even a few coins are arranged neatly. A woman kneels, their eyes closed, silently praying. You wonder if she's asking for fertility, love, or perhaps just a good night's sleep. Spirituality infuses these spaces subtly but persistently. Historians still argue whether women use bath time to perform religious rituals, but the presence of the altar suggests a blend of practicality and devotion. As you observe, a young woman places a small mirror on the altar and whispers a request for clear skin. You smile at the universality of praying for good complexion. While you soak, a pair of women begin discussing the challenge of managing households and slaves. One expresses frustration at a cook who won't follow her recipes. Another laments how difficult it is to find a good wet nurse. Their tone is one of solidarity rather than complaint, and you sense a support network among them. Someone mentions a new law that affects inheritances. It favors male heirs, she sighs, rolling her eyes. Surprise, surprise. The others nod knowingly. A mainstream fact: Roman women's legal rights were limited compared to men, though wealthy women could wield considerable influence through family networks and property management. There's a trace of sarcasm when one says, maybe, if we had a bathhouse in the Senate, they'd listen to us. You laugh with them, imagining senators floating in pools while women critique their policies. You notice, too, the fashion details. Gold earrings catch the light, necklaces with tiny pearls rest against oiled skin, and bracelets jingle softly when someone gestures. The women take pride in adorning themselves, and the baths are as much a place to display jewelry as to relax. They compare rings, comment on cloth dyes, and occasionally trade accessories. One woman says she purchased a glass bead necklace from a Syrian trader. It catches the sun, she says, tilting her neck. Another examines it and agrees. Historians still debate how much access women had to wealth and trading networks, but here, their economic agency is evident. They barter, buy, and brag about their purchases with the same enthusiasm as any modern shopper. A teenage girl approaches her mother and asks softly, "Am I old enough to wear coal?" The mother smiles and says, "On festival days, perhaps." The girl beams. The conversation then shifts to remedies for insomnia. One woman suggests placing chamomile under your pillow. Another recommends a concoction of warm milk and poppy seeds. You recall reading about Victorian insomnia cures and think about how humans have been trying to sleep better for millennia. Someone mentions that in Egypt, people sleep with crocodile amulets. Laughter ensues. You almost share your modern trick of listening to history videos to fall asleep, but you decide to keep that anachronistic tip to yourself. After a while, a matron stands and addresses the group. She has a commanding presence, her hair piled high in an intricate arrangement. "Ladies," she says, "remember that Empress Livia herself bathes here occasionally. We must keep our decorum." Everyone nods, though you notice a few eyes roll. It's a subtle reminder that social hierarchies still apply, even in relaxed settings. The conversation drifts to public morality. Someone mentions Emperor Hadrian's decree again, and the matron notes that he was stricter about mixed bathing than his predecessors. Some men disguise themselves as women just to come in here, she says, raising an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether cross-dressing to enter women's baths was a widespread phenomenon or just gossip fodder. Either way, it makes for an entertaining story, and you imagine a senator tripping over his own sandals while trying to keep his wig in place. You finish your soak feeling refreshed and privileged to have glimpsed this side of bath culture. The women's voices are softer and less raucous than the men's, but they carry weight and wit. You stand, squeezing water from your hair, and make your way to the steps. A woman you've been sitting near touches your arm and says kindly, "Watch your step, the marble is slippery." You thank her, aware that no matter the era, women look out for each other in the bathroom. As you leave the women's section, you take one last look at the altar to Venus, the laughing teenagers, and the matron who's now admonishing someone about proper hairpins. You smile, thinking of your own friends back home, and wonder what they'd say about your Roman spa day. You also think back to earlier. Remember that crocodile dung depilatory? Clearly, creativity and courage are two ingredients for beauty. You exit the women's section and move down a corridor that leads toward the heart of the bathhouse's engineering marvels. Here, the chatter and laughter fade, replaced by the distant hum of rushing water and the faint rumble of furnaces. You find yourself in a long room dominated by a row of arches that reveal the inner workings of the hypocaust system. Beneath the floor, slaves stoke large fires that heat the air circulating under the raised floors of the caldarium and tepidarium. Thick pillars of brick support the floor above, creating an intricate honeycomb of tunnels. The heat down here is intense, and beads of sweat form on your forehead as you peer into the smoky darkness. You marvel at the sheer amount of labor required to keep the baths running smoothly. A mainstream fact emerges. These hypocaust systems were feats of engineering, allowing for even heating and demonstrating the Romans' mastery of both design and logistics. A man in a soot-streaked tunic approaches, carrying an armful of firewood. He wipes his brow with the back of his hand and nods at you. You ask how often they need to stoke the fires. "Constantly," he replies with a tired smile. "If we let them die, the caldarium becomes a frigidarium." He laughs at his own joke. He explains that the fires burn day and night, fed by teams of slaves who take shifts. He gestures to a set of bronze levers that control the flow of hot air. We adjust those to direct more heat to certain rooms. It's like playing a lyre pull one lever too hard, and the tune goes out of key. You imagine the skill required to maintain the right temperature. Historians still argue about the working conditions of the slaves who maintained these systems, whether they were well treated and trained or exploited and replaceable. The truth likely varies by bathhouse and owner. Beyond the hypocaust, you follow a passage to another chamber where massive lead pipes crisscross the walls and ceiling. Water gushes through them with a low roar. Some pipes are thick as a man's arm, others narrower, branching off to different areas. A series of stone tanks collects and distributes water to various pools. You recall that Roman aqueducts supplied these baths with a constant stream of fresh water, often diverted from distant springs. The water flows down through gravity, regulated by a complex network of tanks and valves. A man in a tunic with soot on his face stands by a valve, adjusting it with a wooden pole. He waves and calls out, "Watch this." He twists the valve, and the sound of rushing water increases. "I'm sending more water to the Natatio," he explains, referring to the large outdoor swimming pool. "It's hot outside. People will want to cool off." You grin, appreciating his pride in his work. As you move through this area, you notice little signs painted on the walls indicating which pipe goes where. "To caldarium," says one. "To latrine," says another. The latrines were an integral part of bath complexes. often located near the baths to encourage cleanliness. A mainstream fact, Romans had a sophisticated sewer system, and bathwater eventually flowed into it. Historians debate whether the lead pipes caused widespread lead poisoning. The consensus seems to be that the water's mineral content and flow likely mitigated the risk, though elite Romans did suffer from gout and other ailments that could have been exacerbated by lead exposure. You run a finger along a pipe and feel the coolness of the metal. You're grateful for modern plumbing, but impressed by how advanced this ancient system is. In one corner, you see a series of bronze taps protruding from the wall, each one labeled with the temperature of the water it delivers. You turn one marked tepid, lukewarm, and a stream of pleasantly warm water flows out. You wash your hands, marveling at the convenience. You laugh softly, imagining a Roman complaining that the water isn't hot enough, just like you might complain about a lukewarm shower. A slave nearby refills a clay jug, humming a tune. You ask him about his job. "I manage the flow," he says. If one room gets too much water, another suffers. It's all about balance. He's like a DJ mixing tracks, ensuring the right flow to each space. Along one wall, a fresco depicts Neptune, god of the sea, controlling rivers and streams. He holds a trident and directs water into different channels. The artistry is beautiful and the message clear. Water is both a gift and a power. You consider how the Romans harness water, controlling its flow, temperature, and distribution, to create a bathing experience unparalleled in antiquity. A quirky detail emerges as a slave points to a small pipe leading outside. "That one goes to the fountains and the gardens," he says. "We sometimes fill them with wine for festivals." You raise an eyebrow. "Wine?" He grins. "Just a little. Don't tell the overseer." Historians still argue whether such tales are exaggerations, but it wouldn't be surprising given Roman love of spectacle. Moving on, you pass through a doorway into a long, narrow gallery where enormous bronze boilers sit upon stone plinths. Each boiler is connected to a fire below and a network of pipes above. The heat emanating from them is palpable. A worker in a damp tunic is tapping one with a wooden mallet, listening for inconsistencies that might indicate a crack. "If it leaks," he says, "we're in trouble." You ask how much water they hold, and he shrugs. "Hundreds of amphorae," he answers. "I don't count. I just know they're heavy." The scale of the operation is impressive. You realize that every time you enjoyed a warm bath, men like him had labored to keep the fires burning and the boilers intact. Near the exit of the engineering area, a small display catches your eye. It's a collection of tools used by the builders of the baths: bronze chisels, wooden plumb bobs, hammers, and levels. A plaque explains that the construction of the baths of Caracalla took roughly 5 years and employed thousands of workers. Marble from across the empire was shipped in, columns were hauled by oxen, and mosaics were painstakingly assembled. The plaque also notes that the baths consumed an estimated 10 million liters of water daily. You whistle softly at the number. Historians still argue whether the water usage strained local resources or whether the aqueducts supplied an ample surplus. You imagine environmental activists of the day shaking their fists at the emperor's water bill. As you leave this area, you feel a deep appreciation for the engineering prowess that made the bathhouse possible. It's easy to take the warm pools and flowing fountains for granted when you're lounging in them, but seeing the infrastructure reveals the hidden labor and ingenuity. You think of modern HVAC technicians and plumbers who keep your own home comfortable, and you mentally raise a glass to their ancient counterparts. You emerge back into the main corridor, ready to explore the more spiritual aspects of the baths, perhaps leaving behind the rumble of furnaces and the hiss of water for the whisper of prayers and the flicker of votive flames. Just remember, Next time someone complains about a lukewarm shower, you can regale them with tales of hypocaust maintenance. Leaving behind the roar of water and the crackle of fires, you follow a quieter corridor toward a wing of the bathhouse dedicated to the spiritual and superstitious aspects of Roman life. The walls here are decorated with frescoes of gods and goddesses. Hygeia, goddess of health, holds a serpent-entwined staff. Asclepius, god of healing, stands calmly with his own snake. Niches along the walls contain small altars with flickering oil lamps and bowls of incense. The air smells of frankincense, myrrh, and something earthy, perhaps juniper. Patrons pause before these shrines, murmuring prayers or making quick gestures of reverence. It's a stark contrast to the noisy social hall. Here, voices are hushed and footsteps echo softly on the polished stone. You approach a small altar carved from white marble, its surface stained with candle wax and oil drips. A bronze plaque identifies the deity as Hygeia. On the altar rests a shallow bowl filled with water and floating rose petals. A woman in a simple tunic stands nearby, eyes closed, lips moving silently. She dips her fingers into the water, touches her forehead, and whispers a thanks for her family's health. You wait respectfully, then step forward and place a single fig you found earlier on the altar as an offering. You're not sure if Hygeia likes figs, but you hope the gesture counts. A mainstream fact surfaces, though Romans worshipped a pantheon of gods. Many households had personal deities and domestic rituals tied to health and cleanliness. Bathhouses often included small shrines to these deities, blending physical and spiritual purification. On the wall next to the altar, you notice an array of small clay tablets and papyrus notes left by bathers. Each is inscribed with a request or thanks. One reads, Hygeia, grant my son a speedy recovery from fever. Another thanks the goddess for curing a persistent rash. A more humorous one reads, Asclepius, please help my husband's back so he stops complaining. You chuckle softly at the last, appreciating the timelessness of spousal dynamics. Historians still argue whether such offerings were meant to appease the gods or simply to soothe the offerer's conscience. But the act of writing and leaving the tablet is undoubtedly cathartic. Further along, a small alcove is dedicated to Mithras, a deity popular among soldiers and officials. The alcove is dark, with a bas-relief depicting Mithras slaying a bull, flanked by twin torchbearers. Candles flicker, casting shadows that make the figures appear to move. You hesitate at the entrance, aware that Mithraic rituals were secretive and male only. A man emerges, adjusting his cloak. He nods politely but says nothing, making the space feel even more mysterious. Mithraism's exact practices are still debated by scholars. Some believe it involved ritual meals and stages of initiation, but much remains unknown. The aura of mystery clings to this alcove like incense smoke. Across the way, a more cheerful shrine honors Venus, goddess of love. The altar is strewn with flowers, roses, violets, and sprigs of rosemary. Small mirrors hang on the wall, reflecting light and perhaps inviting self-reflection. Women hover nearby, leaving offerings or touching their fingers to the mirrors. One murmurs a plea for romance, another quietly hopes for fertility. A young woman writes on a wax tablet, glances skyward, then places the tablet before Venus. You catch a fragment of her prayer, "May I be as radiant as Aphrodite at dawn." You smile, thinking of all the times you've hoped for a good hair day. A quirky tidbit: ancient Romans sometimes left offerings of hair combs and pins at Venus's shrines, believing that she might bless their coiffures. You consider leaving your hair tie, but decide you need it for later. Beyond these shrines lies a small garden open to the sky, a rare pocket of greenery within the baths. A shallow pool reflects the surrounding colonnade, and small statues of nymphs and satyrs peek from between laurel bushes. Stone benches invite quiet contemplation. You sit down, inhaling the scent of crushed thyme from the herb beds. On one bench, an older man sits reading a scroll. On another, a young couple whisper, heads close together. A stray cat slinks by, tail held high. Cats were revered in some parts of the empire, particularly in Egypt, and you wonder if anyone has left offerings for Bastet in this Roman garden. Historians still argue whether the cult of Bastet made significant inroads in Rome or remained a niche devotion among expats. We can't ignore such debates, focusing on a stray piece of bread someone dropped out as you watch a dragonfly skim the surface of the pool. A woman sits down next to you and sighs. I come here when the noise inside gets to be too much, she confides. You nod, understanding. She tells you she's leaving a votive offering for her sister, who's expecting a baby. We want the birth to be safe, she says softly. You ask which deity she'll pray to, and she answers, Lucina, goddess of childbirth. She produces a tiny clay doll and places it near a small altar dedicated to Lucina. My mother did this for me, she says, and everything went well. You smile, touched by the tradition. Mainstream fact. Women often prayed to Lucina and Juno Lucina for safe deliveries, leaving offerings such as small dolls or coins. At temples and shrines, on a nearby wall, someone has drawn a crudely painted figure with outstretched arms and a simple inscription, Invoco Fortuna. It's a plea to Fortuna, goddess of fortune. You recall reading that Romans believed in Fortuna, both good and bad, often personified as a capricious goddess. People left offerings hoping to sway her favor. Some even wore amulets shaped like the goddess to ensure good luck. You think back to the phallic amulets sold outside and how they were meant to ward off the evil eye. Spirituality in Rome was as practical as it was mystical. Offerings were insurance policies, prayers were small investments, and gods were potential allies in the unpredictable game of life. Doubt as you stand to leave. You spot a small carved wooden box tucked into a niche. Curious, you lift the lid. Inside are tiny rolled up notes. You pick one and unfurl it. The handwriting is delicate. Thank you, Hygeia, for healing my daughter's cough. I will bring more flowers tomorrow. You roll it back up and carefully replace it. There's something profoundly touching about these intimate messages, left in a public space. They remind you that despite the grandeur and engineering marvels, the baths were also places where people brought their hopes, fears, and gratitude. Historians still argue whether such personal devotions made any difference in people's lives, but clearly they mattered to those who offered them. Leaving the garden, you walk back through the corridor of shrines. You pass Hygeia again and offer a silent thank you for your own health. At the Mithras alcove, you nod respectfully, though you don't enter. At Venus, you wink and bow to try that fig and honey mask. As you exit into the brighter corridor, you feel lighter, as if the act of pausing and observing has cleansed your mind as thoroughly as the baths cleanse your body. You're ready for a snack and perhaps a drink, because all this spiritual reflection has made you hungry. You remember passing a stand earlier selling honey cakes and mulsum, and you decide, that's exactly what your soul and stomach needs. After all, even the gods must understand the appeal of a good snack. The aroma of baking bread and roasting nuts hits you as soon as you step into the area where snacks and drinks are sold. Though the bathhouse is about cleansing and socializing, it's also about sustaining the body through tasty treats. This section is essentially an ancient food court. Wooden stalls line the walls, each offering something different. One vendor has a pile of steaming sausages, their casings glistening. Another sells honey-glazed pastries stacked neatly on a tray. A third is slicing fruit into bowls, the sweet juice dripping onto his hands. The room buzzes with conversation punctuated by the sound of coins clinking and vendors calling out their specials. You realize you've worked up an appetite with All the plunging, sweating, and philosophizing, you approach a stall manned by a woman with a kind face. She offers you a plate of pulse, a porridge made from spelt and barley seasoned with herbs. Good for the stomach, she assures you. You take a bite and are pleasantly surprised by its earthy flavor. It's warm, creamy, and slightly salty, like a hearty oatmeal. Nearby, a young boy sells dates stuffed with walnuts. You buy a handful, their sweetness contrasting nicely with the savory pulse. A mainstream fact about Roman baths, vendors inside and around the baths sold food and drinks to patrons, making it convenient to spend hours there without leaving for meals. These stacks weren't just sustenance. They were part of the leisure experience. You consider how little has changed. Modern spas offer smoothies and fruit bowls. Though at somewhat inflated prices, with a bowl in hand, you find a spot near a table where a group is enjoying Mulsum wine sweetened with honey. They pour you a small cup when you sit down, the golden liquid glinting in the light. You take a sip. It's cool, sweet, and slightly fermented, refreshing after the hot baths. You toast with your new companions, clinking cups softly. One man raises his drink and says, "To the gods of good health and good gossip." Everyone laughs and drinks. Another man grumbles that his wife forbids him from drinking too much Mulsum because he comes home singing off key. You suggest humming quietly, which elicits another laugh. Jokes about being tipsy at the baths seem universal. Across the room, you see a vendor selling garum on small slices of bread. You grimace, remembering the strong odor of fermented fish sauce. "Try it," urges the vendor, thrusting a piece at you. You take it, expecting the worst, but the salty, umami flavor surprises you. It's potent but balanced by the bread's softness. "See," he says proudly. You nod and eat another. A quirky tidbit. Romans loved garum so much that they ate it on nearly everything, and it was a major export product. There was even a luxury version called liquamen made from tuna intestines. Historians still argue whether the average Roman enjoyed garum as much as wealthy gourmands, or if it was an acquired taste reserved for those who could afford the best. Judging by the popularity here, it seems to cross class lines. At a nearby stall, a young girl stirs a pot of warm milk with honey and poppy seeds. "Helps you sleep," her mother tells you. You take a cup, feeling the warmth seep into your hands. The milk is soothing, with a delicate sweetness and a slightly nutty flavor from the poppy seeds. You recall the women's conversation about insomnia remedies and smile. It seems ancient Romans were as obsessed with sleep aids as modern people are. You mentioned the crocodile amulets and depilatories from earlier, causing your table mates to grimace and then explode in laughter. One of them shakes his head and says, "I'll stick to pumice stones, thank you very much." Another remarks that at least crocodile dung is plentiful along the Nile, prompting a quick debate about the empire's best and worst exports. Someone suggests importing oysters from Britannia. Another jokes that British oysters have the same color as their skies. A mainstream fact surfaces. Roman trade networks were vast, bringing foods from across the empire into the city. You realize that the variety of snacks here reflects an early version of the globalized food court. Historians still argue whether commoners had regular access to exotic foods or whether they were mostly consumed by the wealthy. Yet here you see a mix of patrons buying dates from Arabia and figs from local orchards. As you munch, you strike up a conversation with the vendor selling boiled eggs dipped in pine resin. He explains that the resin adds flavor and helps preserve the eggs. "Try dipping it in a little garum," he suggests with a wink. You oblige, and while the combination sounds alarming, it's surprisingly tasty. You tell him so, and he smiles proudly. He then shares a quirky tidbit. Some bathhouses on festival days served dormice stuffed with herbs and dipped in honey. They're like little roasted marshmallows, he says, and you're not entirely sure whether he's joking. He adds, historians still argue whether dormouse farming was sustainable. You laugh, imagining scholars hunched over ancient texts debating rodent husbandry. At another stall, a man pours mulsum and adds a dash of cinnamon, a spice imported from Arabia. It's expensive, he whispers, but worth it. You sip and agree that the warm, sweet spice pairs beautifully with the wine. He tells you of a friend who tried mixing mulsum with pepper for a spicy version. He coughed for days, he says, and everyone laughs. Jokes about failed food experiments are timeless. You then overhear a discussion about a new fad. Ice-chilled wine. They bring snow down from the mountains, someone says. Only the richest can afford it. Another retorts that the wine ends up watered down. Historians still argue whether such extravagance was widespread or confined to decadent households. You decide you'd rather save your money for more honey cakes. Woman carrying a tray of small cakes shaped like seashells walks by. You stop her and buy one. It's soft and sweet, flavored with poppy seeds and drizzled with honey. You share a piece with an elderly man at your table, and he thanks you by telling a riddle. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at midday, and 3 legs in the evening? You groan good-naturedly and answer, a person crawling, walking, and using a cane. He nods, satisfied, and says, Good, now you owe me a sip of your mulsum. You laugh and hand him your cup. The exchange reminds you that ancient dad jokes existed long before dad jeans. After finishing your snacks and drinks, you stand and stretch. Your stomach is pleasantly full, your head slightly light from the honey wine, and your hands sticky with honey and date syrup. You wipe them on a cloth provided by the vendor and thank him. You feel energized, ready to hear stories of baths beyond Rome. You recall hearing travelers discuss far-flung bathhouses that blend Roman customs with local quirks. Perhaps you'll eavesdrop on such tales next. As you turn to leave, you catch a vendor shouting, Get your spiced nuts, fresh from the oven. 2 for 1. You consider buying more, but decide that if you don't move now, you might fall asleep right on the bench. Face first in your poles, you weave your way through the snack stalls, the smell of roasting nuts lingering behind you. Your mind buzzes with new flavors and information. You're ready to step into the broader world of Roman bathing, to hear how people in distant provinces adapt this ritual to different climates and cultures. With one last sip of mulsum, you head toward a doorway, where a map of the empire hangs, decorated with tiny red dots marking major cities. A man stands nearby, pointing at various spots and talking animatedly. You approach, intrigued, eager to compare his stories to your own experience in Rome and to discover the quirks of provincial bathhouses. And maybe, just maybe, someone will confirm or deny that thing about wine flowing from fountains. The man by the map notices your interest and waves you over. He's middle-aged, with weathered skin and a thick beard, and his eyes light up when he speaks. "Ah, traveler," he exclaims. "Have you ever bathed in Aquisiles?" You shake your head. "Then let me tell you," he says, tracing a finger to a spot on the map corresponding to modern-day Bath in Britain. "It's magical. The water there is hot from the ground itself, no need for fires. The locals call it a gift from Sulis Minerva, a goddess they merged with our Minerva." He launches into a description of the Great Bath, its circular shape, and the steam rising from naturally heated springs. "They built a temple right next to it," he adds. "People throw in curse tablets, asking the gods to punish those who steal their clothes." You laugh, thinking back to your own concerns about pickpockets. A mainstream fact surfaces. The Romans often adopted local deities and customs, blending them with their own. Provincial bathhouses like Aquisiles were hybrids, incorporating Roman technology and local beliefs. He then points to a spot in North Africa. Have you ever been to Leptis Magna? Again, you shake your head, and he shakes his in mock despair. You must go. Their baths are magnificent mosaic floors of such color that you feel like you're walking on a painting. And the frigidarium. Theirs built to catch breezes off the sea, so the water is always cool. They even have palm trees growing in the courtyards. He sighs dramatically. You haven't lived until you've dried off under a palm tree with the smell of frankincense on the breeze. His enthusiasm is infectious. He mentions that in some parts of Africa, people added local herbs like rosemary and henna to their oil, giving their skin a subtle dye. A quirky tidbit, he claims that crocodiles sometimes wandered into North African baths, and bathers would calmly share the pool until the reptiles wandered out. Historians still argue whether that's true. He concedes, but it makes a good story. A woman listening nearby chimes in. She's dressed in a tunic dyed a vibrant teal, and her hair is wrapped in a scarf. What about the baths in Asia Minor? She asks. You haven't lived until you've sat in the steaming pools of Hierapolis. She explains that the hot springs there, rich in minerals, leave deposits that create natural terraces. The water is so white and warm it's like bathing in milk, she says, her eyes dreamy. They say it cures all manner of ailments, from joint pain to melancholy. You recall hearing of Pimicol's travertine terraces and realize she's describing those very pools. Historians still argue whether the mineral-rich waters truly healed, or if the belief alone did the trick, but you suspect both played a part. That another man steps forward, his accent hinting at Germanic roots. In our province, he says proudly, pointing to a spot near the Rhine, we have baths too. Smaller, yes, but we dig them into the ground and heat them with stones. In winter, the snow melts on the roofs, and we toss it right into the frigidarium. It's invigorating. He gestures like he's tossing snow. We add juniper branches to the fire. It makes the steam smell like the forest. You smile, imagining a pine-scented caldarium. He then adds, of course, we also use the baths as a place to meet, talk, trade. Some of us even discuss alliances with the Romans there. A mainstream fact, the Romans built bathhouses in garrison towns along frontiers, helping to Romanize the local population and provide a taste of Mediterranean comfort in colder climates. The man adds with a grin, we may be barbarians, but we appreciate a good soak. A traveler from the eastern provinces steps forward. In Antioch, he says, we have baths decorated with scenes of the Tigris and Euphrates. Our oil comes from pistachio nuts, not olives. It's lighter and sweeter, and our baths have roofs carved with stars, so when you lie in the caldarium, you feel like you're under the night sky. You sigh, imagining the beauty. He goes on to describe a particular bathhouse where hot and cold plunges are side by side, so you can alternate quickly. It's like being in a dance, he says, waving his arms. Hot, cold, cold. Your heart beats fast, then slows, then beats fast again. Some physicians say it's good for you. Others warn it will make your head spin. Historians still argue whether it builds resilience or weakens the heart. You nod, thinking of modern debates about cold showers and ice baths. Someone else chimes in about a bathhouse in Gaul that incorporates Celtic round pools and uses fragrant pine resin in the caldarium. Another mentions the baths of Ephesus, which have a library attached, a place where you can go from soaking to studying without so much as drying off. A woman boasts that in Alexandria, their bathhouses float water lily in the frigidarium and burn cinnamon bark in the caldarium. It smells like the spice root, she says with pride. The variety is astonishing, each description like a travel brochure for an ancient spa. You mentally bookmark each location, your list of future vacation spots growing longer by the minute. Amid these stories, debates arise. One man claims that provincial bathhouses are inferior to those in Rome because they lack the grandeur. Another counters that smaller baths can be more charming with local touches you'd never find in the capital. Plus, he adds, the crowds are smaller. You don't have to elbow past senators and philosophers just to get a towel. Laughter ripples through the group. A woman argues that local baths are better because they incorporate regional herbs and traditions. Our people add lavender to the oil, she says, and we sing songs while we massage each other. It's more personal. Historians still argue whether the spread of Roman baths homogenized culture or allowed for a blending of traditions. Listening to these travelers, it seems both are true. The architecture and ritual create a shared experience. While local elements infuse each bath with its own personality, you contribute your own story, recounting your experience of being scraped. With a strigil in the caldarium, and the group roars with laughter when you mention the bucket of dirty oil. Someone jokes that they've heard of people bottling strigmentum and selling it as perfume. Perhaps in Gaul, another quips. You also share the rumor about fish in the frigidarium, and a man from Carthage retorts that their fish actually wear laurel wreaths. The conversation is lively, lighthearted, and surprisingly informative. Through these stories, you realize how far the Roman world extends and how the bathhouse ritual has been adapted to every environment. As the conversation wanes, the man with the map rolls it up, secures it with a leather strap, and bows slightly. I must get home to my wife. He says she gets angry if I smell like the baths for too long. He winks, and the group chuckles. You thank him for the stories and watch as the travelers disperse, some heading back to the snack stalls, others toward the pools. You feel a deep sense of connection to these far-flung places you've never visited, and you understand how the baths serve as a microcosm of the empire, each person bringing a piece of their homeland, each sharing a bit of themselves in return. With this sense of wanderlust simmering in your chest, you stand and take a deep breath. The next part of your journey will explore how these beloved institutions change as the world around them shifts. Rumor has it that the baths don't always maintain their glory, that politics, religion, and economics can send even the grandest thermi into decline. You decide to see what happens when the tide of history turns against the communal soak. With a last look at the map, you head toward a corridor decorated with fading frescoes and overgrown with ivy, ready to ponder the future of these temples of leisure. The corridor leading to the older wing of the baths feels different, quieter, darker, and almost melancholic. The frescoes on the walls are faded, paint peeling away in flakes that reveal the stone beneath, where once vibrant images of gods and heroes danced, now muted colors hint at former grandeur. You step carefully over cracked tiles, aware that this part of the complex sees fewer visitors. A chill runs along your spine, and not just because the temperature drops. You have reached the section that tells of decline and changing attitudes. It's a stark reminder that nothing, not even marble palaces of leisure, lasts forever. Emerge into a cavernous hall that once would have been filled with laughter and steam. Now, only a handful of people are present, their voices echoing in the emptiness. The floor is dusty and cobwebs hang from the corners like forgotten tapestries. A few pools still contain water, but the level is low, and the surface shows a thin film of algae. You recall that, after the 3rd century, the Roman world faced crisis, economic troubles, invasions, plagues that strained its resources. Maintenance of massive bath complexes became difficult. Some emperors diverted funds from baths to fortifications. A mainstream fact, Emperor Constantine the Great is known for embracing Christianity and ushering in changes that affected public life, including bathing habits. While he didn't ban baths outright, the new religion's emphasis on modesty and spiritual purity led some to view communal bathing as decadent. You sit on a cracked marble bench and listen to two men discussing their concerns. The aqueducts have been damaged again, one says, shaking his head. Barbarians cut the pipelines in the countryside. The other nods grimly. Without water, these baths are just empty holes. They lament that taxes have risen while services decline. Our grandparents told stories of fountains that never stopped flowing, says the second man. Now we ration water like we ration grain. Their voices carry a bitterness that hints at a deeper shift in the Roman psyche. Historians still argue whether the decline of baths was due more to economic collapse, the spread of disease, or changes in cultural values. The truth is likely a confluence of factors, like cracks that form and spread slowly until the whole structure gives way. Walking further, you see a group of Christians gathered quietly in one corner, praying together. Their leader, a stern-faced man, speaks about the importance of inner cleansing over outer. We wash our souls with baptism, he says, not our bodies with indulgence. He glances pointedly at a young man lounging in a nearby pool. The youth shrugs and continues to soak. Christianity's growing influence introduced a different view of the body and public behavior. Communal nakedness became suspect, and the excesses of the baths were criticized. A mainstream fact, church leaders, such as Tertullian and Augustine, wrote admonitions against the moral dangers of public baths. Though many Christians still bathed, historians still argue whether the church actively discouraged bathing or simply co-opted bathhouses for its own rituals. In another alcove, an elderly woman sighs and tells her daughter, "When I was young, we had 3 new bathhouses in the city. Now, this is the only one still operating." Her daughter replies, "Maybe we can bathe at home." The mother shakes her head. "We don't have running water. Only the wealthy can afford their own baths now." Their conversation underscores a shift from public to private bathing. As the empire's infrastructure faltered, those who could afford it installed private baths in their villas. The communal aspect began to fade. A quirky tidbit, some wealthy Romans built miniature thermae in their homes complete with hypocausts, while others simply had servants pour warm water over them. It's like the ancient version of a home spa. A man with a grizzled beard approaches you and grunts, enjoying the glory of Rome. He laughs bitterly. "See how glorious it is?" He gestures to a leaking pipe dripping steadily into a cracked pool. "We used to have competitions to see who could stay in the caldarium the longest. Now we compete to see who can find enough water to wash." You nod, feeling his frustration. He launches into a joke to lighten the mood. "At least we don't have to worry about pickpockets anymore. Who'd steal an empty purse?" You chuckle, the levity breaking up the heaviness. Humor, it seems, survives even as marble crumbles. There are still some bright spots. In one corner, a group of children splash in a small pool, their laughter ringing against the stone walls. Their mother watches them fondly, occasionally calling them back from the edge. For them, the decrepit state of the baths means little. They're just happy to play in water. You smile, reminded that life continues even amidst decline. Nearby, a teenager sketches the room on a wax tablet, his fingers moving quickly. He is documenting what remains, capturing the faded beauty before it disappears completely. Perhaps he is the ancient equivalent of a preservationist, understanding the value of memory. As you wander through the hall, you notice some newer graffiti etched into the walls. One reads, "Rome will rise again," while another simply says, "Remember us." There's a poignancy to these messages, an awareness of living through a transition. Historians still argue whether the people of late antiquity realized the scale of the changes they were experiencing, but these inscriptions suggest at least some did. There's both hope and resignation in their words. You exit the hall and walk into a sunlit courtyard where weeds have begun to sprout between the pavers. A lone fountain still functions, trickling water into a mossy basin. You dip your fingers into the stream, and the water is cool and clear. You bring your wet fingers to your face, savoring the sensation. In this moment, you appreciate the baths for what they have given you: cleanliness, community, and stories, and you mourn the fragility of structures, literal and societal. You think of modern public spaces and how easily they could fall into disrepair if neglected. The decline of the bath serves as a cautionary tale about maintenance and priorities. As you leave this wing, you glance back at the cracked frescoes one last time. You think of the Christians praying, the children laughing, the man joking about empty purses. You consider how morals and technology, politics and economics all intertwine. You decide that while the baths may fade, the human need for community and cleanliness endures. You're grateful that you're experiencing these baths while they still operate, even if some pools are empty. It makes you appreciate the care that goes into maintaining your own spaces. You head toward the entrance, ready to collect your belongings, feeling a mix of sadness and gratitude. There's still one last experience waiting. The moment when you depart, wrap yourself up, and walk home through Rome's twilight streets, carrying the warmth and wisdom of the baths with you.